There are things a man can take from you and things he cannot. He can take your land. He can take your cattle, your money, your years of work. He can take the roof over your head and the ground beneath your boots. But your name is different. Your name is the one thing that belongs to you before anything else does and after everything else is gone. It's what people say over your grave. It's what your children carry into the world when you're no longer in it to carry it yourself. Deputy Roy Callis learned that lesson on a cold Thursday in October 1883. He learned it from a woman, and he did not learn it gently. Clara Voss rode into Dustfall, Texas, just past 2 in the afternoon, when the autumn sun was sitting low and mean over the flat horizon, and the wind off the plains had enough bite in it to remind you that winter wasn't asking permission this year. She'd been on the road for 4 days out of Amarillo, traveling alone, sleeping under an open sky with her saddle for a pillow and her father's old Colt Peacemaker close enough to touch without reaching. She was 32 years old, lean, sun-dark, with eyes the color of old creek water, deep brown and very still. She didn't look like a woman carrying a war inside her chest. She looked like exactly what she was, a rancher's daughter who had buried her father 3 weeks ago and hadn't slept a full night since. Dustfall wasn't much to look at. One main road wide enough for 2 wagons to pass without exchanging insults. A general store, a church with a bell tower and no bell, a jail that needed new paint, a land office squeezed between a blacksmith and a dry goods merchant. And, at the far end of the street, the Brass Bell Saloon, which from the outside looked like a building that had survived several arguments with the weather and lost most of them. Clara studied the town from horseback before she dismounted. Old habit. Her father had taught her that trick before she was 10 years old. Read a place before you walk into it, girl. Same as reading a man. Look at what's there and look harder at what's missing. What was missing from Dustfall's main street on a Thursday afternoon was easy enough. People. There were some. A woman shaking a rug from a second-floor window, a boy leading a mule toward the livery, 2 old men sitting outside the general store doing nothing with great commitment. But for a town this size, at this hour, it was quiet in a way that felt chosen rather than natural. Clara filed that away and tied her horse outside the Brass Bell. She pushed through the batwing doors and stood for a moment while her eyes adjusted to the dimmer light inside. The saloon was maybe half full. For men at the bar. A poker game running in the back corner with 3 players and no particular enthusiasm. 2 men eating at a table near the window. And in the far corner, sprawled with the casual ownership of men who have never been told no in their own territory. 3 men in an arrangement that told you everything about the local hierarchy before a single word was spoken. The one in the center had a deputy's badge catching the lamplight. Big man. Thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had spent 20 years deciding that wasn't interesting enough and had gone mean instead. His name was Roy Callis, though Clara didn't know that yet. She'd learn it soon enough. She went to the bar and asked Ed, the bartender, for coffee. Ed was a round man somewhere in his 50s with the kind eyes of someone who had witnessed too many things he couldn't stop and had developed a philosophy of small kindnesses in response. He poured the coffee without comment, noticed the peacemaker on her hip, noticed the way she wore it like it was part of her anatomy rather than an accessory, and decided his questions could wait for someone else to ask them. Clara wrapped both hands around the tin cup and let the warmth work in her fingers and thought about what she'd come here to do. Thomas Voss had filed his deed claim on 400 acres south of the Coyote Creek line 2 years before he died. Good land, spring-fed, well-grassed, the kind of acreage a man could build something lasting on if he had the years left to do it. Thomas had been 58 when he filed, old enough to be realistic about his timeline, stubborn enough to try anyway. He'd spent 14 months working the paperwork through the proper channels, paying his filing fees, getting his claim witnessed, doing everything the law required because Thomas Voss had always believed in doing things the right way. What Thomas hadn't accounted for was that Harlan Pruitt, who owned considerable land north and east of that same stretch, had decided he wanted it. And Harlan Pruitt had the money to make a county judge decide he deserved it. The ruling came down 6 months ago. Deed claim invalidated. Land transferred to Pruitt's holdings on the grounds that Thomas's original filing contained fraudulent representations. The word fraudulent had been the thing that broke Thomas Voss, Clara thought. Not the land, the word. Because Thomas had never told a fraudulent thing in his life, and the accusation attached to his name in an official court document had lodged in him like a splinter working its way towards something vital. He'd gone to Amarillo to fight it through appeals. The 4-day ride each direction had pushed his failing heart past what it had left in it. He died with the word still attached to his name. Clara had arrived in Dustfall to remove it. She was thinking through the steps, the land office, the deed records, the letter from Judge Cunningham she carried in her saddlebag, when Roy Callis decided he'd waited long enough to involve himself. He came off his chair like a man who'd been building up to something, sauntered to the bar with his thumbs in his belt, and positioned himself slightly too close to Clara's left shoulder. Not touching, just crowding. The particular kind of proximity that says, I am larger than you, and I want you to feel that. Help you with something, ma'am? His voice was the kind designed to carry a room. You look a little turned around. I'm not, Clara said, without looking up from her coffee. No. He put his elbows on the bar. We don't get many women coming into Dustfall unaccompanied, especially not wearing iron like that. He nodded toward the Peacemaker. Makes a man curious about the situation. A man's curiosity is his own business, Clara said. Same as mine. Someone at the poker table in the back laughed at that. Callis registered it and didn't enjoy it. I'm the law in this town, while Sheriff Holt is away, Callis said, his voice dropping to something with more weight behind it. So your business in Dustfall is somewhat my business by definition. You understand? Clara set down her coffee cup, turned on her stool to face him directly for the first time. She looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at a man who might be trouble. Not his eyes first, but at his hands, his feet, his shoulders, the geometry of how he was standing, and what that said about what he was prepared to do. I'm here to speak with your land office about a deed claim, she said. My father filed on 400 acres south of Coyote Creek before he died. I'm here to address the ruling that was made without proper notification to his legal heir. She watched the flicker cross his face. There and gone in less than a second. But she'd been watching for it. What was your father's name? Thomas Voss. The saloon had gone quiet by degrees as the conversation continued, the way a room does when it can feel something building. By the time Clara said her father's name, the only sound was the wind outside pressing against the window glass and the distant ring of the blacksmith hammer 2 doors down. Roy Callis let the name sit in the air for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was a particular kind of smile that Clara had seen on certain men's faces before. The smile of someone who has decided that cruelty dressed up as information is still cruelty's equal. Thomas Voss. He said it slowly, like he was tasting something sour and finding he enjoyed the taste. Well now, you rode all this way for that name. He looked around the room as if inviting an audience to share his amusement. I'll be straight with you, ma'am, because I'm a straight-dealing man. Your daddy's name on that deed wasn't worth the ink he used to sign it. Judge ruled 2 months back that the claim contained fraudulent representations. Land went to Harlan Pruitt, legal and proper. Thomas Voss was a drunk and a liar, and the court record of this county says so in plain writing. He said it loud. He said it the way a man says something when he wants the room to hear it and remember it and carry it back out into the street when they leave. The saloon held its breath. Clara didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't let anything change in her face that she didn't choose to let change. She sat on that bar stool like something carved from the same stone the frontier was made of, and she let the words land on her without flinching, and then she spoke. My father rode with the 3rd Texas Cavalry, she said. He carried medicine through 3 counties during the yellow fever epidemic of '71, when the regular supply lines had collapsed, and people were dying in their homes for want of quinine. He helped raise the frame of the Baptist church in Haskell with his own hands and refused to take payment for the labor. He gave 15 years of honest work to the rangeland of this territory and never once filed a false document, never once cheated a man in a transaction, and never once gave his word and broke it. She paused, and you just called him a drunk and a liar, in front of a room full of men. You used your badge and his grave and his inability to defend himself to say those words where they'd be heard and remembered. I want you to understand that I heard them too. Callus stared at her. The smile was still on his face, but had gone uncertain at the edges, the way a candle flame goes when a draft finds it. You got a letter, he said, trying to recover the ground. From some Amarillo judge? Don't matter here. This is Dustfall. Jurisdiction ends at the county line. Whatever paper you're carrying doesn't apply. Then take it to Sheriff Holt. Sheriff Holt is away on business. When does he return? Hard to say. Clara looked at him steadily. Is he away on business? Or is he away because it's more convenient for certain interested parties that he not be present while those parties consolidate their land holdings? The uncertainty on Callus's face curdled into something harder. He leaned in close, dropping his voice so the room couldn't hear him now, just her. Listen to me very carefully, he said. Harlan Pruitt owns half this county outright and the other half on paper. The ruling on your daddy's land is settled. The deed is filed. The transaction is complete. There is no appeal you can make, no letter you can show, and no amount of grieving daughter persistence that will change any of that. I'm telling you this as plainly as I know how. Take your horse and your paperwork and ride back to wherever you came from. Grieve your daddy in peace. Leave Dustfall alone. He straightened up, and as he did, his right hand drifted down toward the gun on his hip. Not a draw, a reminder. The kind of reminder men like him had been delivering to people without recourse for years. The reminder that said, I have this, and you don't, and that is the end of the conversation. Before you find out what happens next, if this story has you by the throat, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Tell me in the comments what country you're listening from. I read every single one. Now hold tight, because what comes next is the part of this story that nobody in the Brass Bell Saloon had any way to prepare for. Clara Voss had been 13 years old when her father set a tin can on a fence post at 200 yards and handed her a rifle and told her to stop thinking and start breathing. She'd missed the first 7 shots. Hit the 8th. Thomas Voss had said nothing, just picked up the can, walked it back to 250 yards, and put it on the post again. By the time she was 16, she didn't miss. Thomas had never set out to make his daughter a markswoman. He'd set out to make her safe. There was a difference, and he understood it. The frontier in the 1860s and 1870s was not a place that apologized for its dangers, and a woman alone on that frontier, which Clara would inevitably sometimes be, needed to be able to answer the world in whatever language the world chose to speak. Sometimes that language was patience. Sometimes it was law. Sometimes, on the days when patience had been exhausted and law had been bought, it was something older. Thomas Voss had served as a sharpshooter with the Texas Rangers for 6 years before he put the badge away and chose the quiet life of ranching and building and trying to leave something behind him that wasn't a body count. He'd been among the best in the territory at what he did, and what he did was shoot with an accuracy that bordered on the unreasonable and a steadiness under pressure that other men spent entire careers trying and failing to learn. He passed all of it to Clara, not just the mechanics of it, the grip and the stance and the breath control, and the way you let the sight find the target rather than forcing it. He'd passed the interior of it, the stillness, the way you take everything that is happening around you, the noise and the fear and the bodies in motion and the impossible speed of crisis, and you find the quiet place inside it, and you operate from there. Speed matters, he told her once, when she was 20, and she'd asked him directly about the man-to-man reality of what she was learning. But certainty matters more. A certain hand that's a fraction slower will beat an uncertain hand that's faster 9 times in 10. The 10th time is just bad luck, and bad luck finds everyone eventually regardless. What about the other man? She'd asked. The other man is usually afraid, Thomas had said. Fear makes the hand shake. Fear makes the eye jump off the target. Fear makes men draw before they're ready, because waiting feels like dying. You take the fear out of yourself, and you take most of the danger out of the other man at the same time. She had practiced every single day for 19 years. Not because she wanted to use it, because Thomas had taught her that preparation was a form of respect for the world's difficulty. Now she sat on a bar stool in the Brass Bell Saloon in Dustfall, Texas, with a deputy's hand drifting toward his gun, and every one of those 19 years was running quiet and steady through her blood like a river that knows where it's going. "Don't," she said. One word, flat and certain and without heat. The way you say something when you mean it completely. Roy Callis stopped. He wasn't sure afterward why he stopped. He told himself he'd been assessing the situation. The truth, which he was never entirely honest with himself about, was that something in that single word had reached through his confidence and found something older and more animal underneath, something that recognized, without being able to name it, that the woman on the bar stool was not afraid of him at all. At the corner table, Pete, one of Callis's companions, had pushed back his chair and gotten to his feet with his gun already half drawn, reading the moment badly, and moving on instinct without thinking it through. "You want me to?" Pete started. "Sit down, Pete," Clara said, still without looking at him. Her eyes were on Callis, and they didn't move. Pete sat down. He would think about why he sat down for several weeks afterward without arriving at a satisfying answer. Clara reached into her saddlebag, which was resting against the base of the bar stool, and withdrew a folded document. She placed it on the bar between herself and Callis with a single deliberate motion. "That is a letter from Judge Elroy Cunningham of Amarillo," she said, affirming that the deed ruling in this county was conducted without proper notification to the legal heir of the filing party, that being me, and is therefore subject to immediate review under territorial procedure. I'd like you to escort me to your land office so I can file the appropriate challenge documentation." Callis didn't look at the paper. He looked at her. "That letter means nothing in this county. I told you. I also have," Clara continued, as though he hadn't spoken, "written correspondence from Ranger Captain Webb Dolan, who rode with my father in the 66th and who is, as of last Tuesday, in transit to Dustfall to conduct a formal inquiry into land acquisition practices in this county over the past 3 years. He expects to arrive within 2 days. When he arrives, the disposition of everyone involved in this situation will be a matter of considerable interest to his investigation." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. The silence before had been the held breath of people waiting to see what happened next. This silence was something else. This was the silence of a room doing arithmetic and not liking the numbers. Callis looked at her for a long moment. Clara could see it happening behind his eyes, the calculation, the weighing of what she might be bluffing about against what she might not be, the discomfort of a man who has built his security on being the most dangerous thing in his vicinity and has just encountered evidence that this may not be entirely true. He made his choice. He made it the way cornered men make choices when ego and self-preservation are pulling in opposite directions, and ego is slightly louder on the day. His hand dropped to his gun. Clara moved. What the men in the Brass Bell Saloon saw, or thought they saw, was difficult for most of them to reconstruct afterward with any reliability, because it happened faster than the eye is built to properly process. What they heard was clear. 2 shots, close together, close enough that a man listening from outside might have mistaken them for one. What they saw when the smoke settled was Roy Callis on his knees in the sawdust, his gun arm clutched to his chest, a dark stain spreading through his sleeve just below the elbow. His revolver was on the floor 4 feet away from him. His face had gone the color of old flour, and his mouth was open, but nothing was coming out of it. Clara Voss was standing with the Peacemaker raised, steady as a surveyor's post, smoke unwinding from the barrel in a thin gray ribbon that drifted toward the ceiling and disappeared. She had moved 3 inches to the right when he drew. Just 3 inches, enough to let his shot find the floor beside her rather than her. She had drawn and fired in the time it took his bullet to travel from his gun to where she wasn't standing anymore. She swept the room with her eyes. Methodical, patient. Pete had both hands flat on the table and was leaning as far back in his chair as physics permitted. His companion had both palms up and was staring at the ceiling with the focused attention of a man praying hard and fast. Ed the bartender had a scattergun in his hands pointed at the ceiling, the posture of a man who had chosen careful neutrality and wanted everyone to know it. "Anyone else?" Clara said. The saloon gave its answer in the form of continued, emphatic silence. She walked to where Callis was kneeling, holstered the Peacemaker in the same unhurried motion she'd drawn it, and crouched down in front of him, so she was at eye level with him. His face was sheened with sweat. His arm was bleeding steadily, but not catastrophically. She'd hit him below the elbow, threading carefully between the bones, the way her father had taught her shoot when stopping a man was necessary and killing him was not. "That will heal," she said quietly. "Clean break, nothing that won't mend in 8 weeks. I want you to know that was a choice I made, not an accident of aim." He looked at her. The bluster was completely gone. There was just pain and something that was working its way toward understanding. "When Captain Dolan arrives," she said, "you're going to tell him everything you know about the land ruling. Who gave the order? Who paid the judge? Who instructed you to obstruct the legal heir of Thomas Voss from filing her challenge documentation? You do that, your cooperation gets noted in the official record. You don't do that." She looked at his arm, then back at his face. "The arm will be the least of your problems." She stood. "Someone see to this man's wound," she said to the room at large. "And someone show me to the land office." Ed, the bartender, set down the scattergun and came around the bar. "I can take you, ma'am," he said. His voice was steady. His eyes were full of something that took Clara a moment to identify, because she hadn't expected to see it. It was relief, raw and deep and long overdue. Webb Dolan rode into Dustfall 39 hours later, exactly when Clara had said he would. He was a broad man in his 60s with a gray beard and a ranger's badge worn honestly, the kind of badge that has attended funerals and doesn't treat the responsibility lightly. He'd known Thomas Voss since 1866 and had wept privately when the news reached him and had saddled his horse within the hour of receiving Clara's letter. The investigation took 11 days and uncovered more than anyone had expected. 6 fraudulent land rulings across 3 counties. A judge who had been on Pruitt's payroll for 4 years. 2 deputies, including one Roy Callis, who had been systematically discouraging legal challenges through intimidation. A paper trail that led from Dustfall's land office directly to Harlan Pruitt's desk and straight into a territorial court proceeding that occupied lawyers and judges for the better part of the following year. The 400 acres south of Coyote Creek were restored to the Voss estate. Clara filed the corrected deed on a clear November morning, standing at the same land office counter she'd been denied access to 12 days before. The clerk who processed it handled the document with both hands, the way you handle something that carries more weight than its material suggests. She rode out of Dustfall that afternoon without ceremony. She declined Ed's offer of a meal and a room. She thanked Webb Dolan with a handshake and a few words that were private and don't belong in this telling. She had a hill outside Amarillo to get back to. The light was going amber and thin by the time she reached the grave. She sat beside it in the cooling grass and told her father everything, the way she'd told him things her whole life. What Callis had said, what she had done, what the land was worth, and what his name was worth, and how in the end the second one had proved harder to take than the first. She sat there until the stars came out one by one, and the wind off the plains had turned from cold to genuinely bitter, and she didn't move because she wasn't finished yet. "They called you a drunk and a liar," she said finally, in front of witnesses. They put it in a court record and expected it to stay there. She put her hand on the stone marker. The rough granite had kept some of the day's warmth, and she held it. It didn't stay there. She stood, adjusted the Peacemaker on her hip, looked at the stone one more time. Thomas Voss, 1821 to 1883. He built things that lasted. She had chosen that inscription herself. She had fought with 2 other people about it, because they'd suggested something softer, something about rest and peace and the Lord's keeping. She'd understood what they meant and had chosen differently anyway. He had built things that lasted. That was the truth of him. The ranch and the deeds and the church frames and the neighbors helped through hard seasons and the daughter taught to stand in the world without flinching. All of it lasting. All of it his. And his name. His name most of all. Clara Voss walked back to her horse in the dark and pointed it toward home. Some debts get settled in courtrooms. Some in land offices. Some in letters to the right men who still believe the law is supposed to mean something. Clara Voss had used all of those, and she had used one more method in a saloon in Dustfall, Texas, on a cold Thursday in October, when a deputy with borrowed authority had called her father's name something it was not. Thomas Voss had told her, more than once. That violence was the last resort of situation and a heavy thing to carry in the afterward. He'd also told her that the world would occasionally leave a person no other door, and that when that door was the only one remaining, hesitation was just another word for losing everything you went in there to protect. She hadn't hesitated. She thought he would have understood. She thought he would have told her to put the Peacemaker away now and go build something on the 400 acres south of Coyote Creek. She intended to. If this story rode with you all the way to the end, leave a like to honor the journey. Subscribe for more tales from the frontier, and tell me in the comments what country you're listening from. These stories travel farther than I expect, and every comment reminds me why the telling matters. Until next time, partner, hold your name close. Carry it honestly. It's the one thing in this world that no court and no deputy and no amount of greed can permanently take from you, as long as there's someone willing to ride 300 miles to say so. Ride safe.